how to start?
You need your,
Yeah, sorry. How to start and what to do and who. Okay. And who's here on campus and then all of a sudden one day I was just sitting there and pondering life, and there was a knock on my door. And here was this very young professor coming and saying, I want to do something global with you. I want to do something international. And I'm from the biomedical sciences. And I said, wow, what a wonderful start, because I had been the director of the founding director of the Center for Global Health at the University of Toronto for almost 10 years. And it had been my goal to always try to involve the biomedical folks. It's easier to involve the clinical people because those skills are so readily applicable on the ground and in the field. And so I thought, wow, what a start that was. So thank you both, Joel and Dominic and Patricia here too, for making it possible for me to be here today with you. And there's so many things I could say, and I know I don't have much time, but what I'm going to do today is I'm going to run you through a little bit of what I've learned in the last 10 years of doing the Planetary Health Weekly, reading about 1,200 articles a year, about 100 articles a month, publishing 20 every week. And just to mention that, and I will say it later, I have a little, my own blurb about signing up for what's now the Planetary Health Monthly later on. So I know that there's quite a few friends here today, and I'll also mention, and I'll just signal them out, Professor Michael Frischkopf from the Faculty of Music. He was so instrumental with us in getting the Global Health Fair started by bringing over his dancers and musicians from the Faculty of Music. And I can't remember the space we used to do it at over across the street. And we would have all this music happening and food and photograph contests with the medical students and all sorts of things. So it's just beyond happiness to see it continuing and to flourish and to have so many people still engaged in this endeavor. And you know, life passes quickly, and you can see what I've written there. And I just can't believe that I'm now in the Golden Jubilee class from the University of Saskatchewan, even with my BSc that was mentioned. And to think that all those years have gone by and all the work and all the relationships and the field work, and it's just been really great. And I'm so happy to be with you today. And like I said, I had some truly great years here. And amongst many of the activities was this Global Health Fair. And I can't emphasize how wonderful it is that you're continuing it. But today I'm with you, I'm going to keep you on board with one of the greatest challenges. And I really can't believe how well what I'm going to present fits in from what everybody else has presented this morning. Right from the talk about burnout, because now we have climate anxiety amongst youth and others, including myself, mental health issues, primordial in adaptation to the climate crisis, even anesthetics. Our first presenter today from the Department of Anesthesiology at the University, Aga Khan Hospital and University. I'm going to talk a bit about anesthetics later. The spread of malaria, the spread of all kinds of vector-borne diseases is exacerbating. Neonatal and infant health, that's so important too in the climate crisis. Pregnancy and the outcomes and sequelae and all the issues around sexual and reproductive health, and of course displaced persons, which is happening in a scale beyond our imagination, really. When she mentioned that, I forget it was 83 million people are internally, I mean, how do you even imagine that? And where are they displaced to? I know there are some of these camps with 500,000 people in a camp, and something like, what is it, 6 million refugees now in Uganda. Uganda is the country has the most refugees of any country in the world almost. But so what the goal is, though, is to tell you about what's happening, why it's happening, how it's happening, where it's happening, et cetera, all those W's and H's, and then to see where we go. So about 12 years ago, I started publishing this newsletter here in the Division of Community Engagement. And I always thought that was such a wonderful name, and I'm sorry to hear that it's gone, because community engagement starts with our own families, with our own friends, with our own communities, with our groupings and our our towns and where we live, our neighborhoods and all that, and then it goes right up to the international. And so I always felt very, very part of the gestalt of community engagement, because that's exactly what we were trying to do. We were trying to engage communities from around the world in order to do something positive. And so one day I remember, rest in peace, Dr. Jill Conkin. She said to me, she said, "David, why do you keep sending out so much information all the time?" I said, "Well, I'd like to share what I'm learning." And she said, "Well, why don't you just do it, I don't know, once a week or once a month or something?" So I said, bingo, that was it. So I started the Global Health Weekly, and I see now that it's become the Global Health Monthly. So I'm very pleased to see it's still going on. And as soon as I left the University of Alberta in 2015, and when I started at Toronto Metropolitan University, 3 months later, I started what I call the Planetary Health Weekly, because one of the greatest things I learned here, and not just taught, but that I learned, was that what was going on in the world, what was happening to the Earth and its wellness, and therefore our wellness, was so linked. So we had the ecological wellness and the global health. It's just a natural pair. And that became planetary health for me. And I lifted that term from, I just can't think of his name right now. He was the editor of The Lancet at the time, and he had written an editorial about a year or so ago and coined the terms planetary health. And I thought, well, that really sums it up, because we're all here on the planet, and the planet is something physical as well. And not just all the beings, the living beings, not just people, of course. It relates to all the animals and even down to the to the protozoa and all the rest of it. So that's kind of how I got started. And then a few other things happened in my life. And one was to learn that the map that I grew up with, and I'm a big fan of maps and love to travel and all the rest of it, and geography and learning about other cultures and whatnot. And then I saw this one. This is the Peters projection map. And it shows the world accurate to the landmass, the area of each country in the world. So if you look on this one, Canada's like super giant. We're giant anyway. But when you look at this one, yeah, it puts it a little bit more in perspective. We shouldn't have our heads too high in the cloud. And also take a look at Africa here. Bigger than North America, bigger than South America, almost way bigger than Western Europe. And look at what we used to look at, with North America being way bigger than Africa. And that's part of course, the colonial mindset, but that's how our thinking gets shaped too. And but this now starts to create a bit more equitable world, a little bit more rational and evidence-based. Then the other thing was this. In 1968, when the astronauts took this picture from the moon of Earth, this gave us a whole new perspective on what we are, who we are, and actually where we're going. This one here, and this one happens just to be our home, the only one. There's a lot of people thinking there's more life out there somewhere in the universe, but by golly, we now can see like hundreds of zillions of light years away, and we still haven't detected any electromagnetic radiation or whatever coming from anybody. And we have, just like all of us, our Earth also has a thin skin, which is sort of the focus of my presentation today. So the Earth's atmosphere, various levels, various substances and compositions, but you'll see the one here that's closest to the Earth, and that's where almost all the life-sustaining gases are because of gravity. Interestingly enough, gas has weight, and it also is pulled down to the Earth by the Earth's gravity and keeps us alive. And we're going to get into this because this is the whole essence of the climate crisis, is the imbalance in this atmosphere. Oh, that one should have been removed. So what is climate change? So simple, it's the repeated and increasingly unusual changes to our usual and historic climate and weather patterns and fluctuations. The weather always fluctuates. I grew up in Saskatchewan. My gosh, you'd have who knows, one day you'd wake up, it would be freezing cold, and like here today, I was so surprised to walk out this morning. It was 5 degrees Celsius. Glad I knew before I was coming, or else I would have brought all my heavy gear. And this has been going on since about 1960 on an observable scale. especially now in the 21st century, in the last 25 years, but especially even in the last 10 years. What we're seeing is unbelievable changes in what we call our climate. So now it's a climate crisis. It truly is. And I'm going to explain why is it a climate crisis. But the crisis means that it's the confluence of so many highly damaging related climate events in recent years affecting all parts of the world, year after year, without change or slowdown. Everything is accelerating now. And it's so interesting now, too, if it hasn't set a record, it's kind of not important now. But if it was going to set a record, it was only beating last year's record. And so what's going on is truly a crisis. There's a huge destruction of life and infrastructure taking on, huge economic losses. And I'm going to make this it's available to everybody, so I'm going to kind of go over some of these data points a little fast. But in 2023, there was unbelievable devastation in Canada from climate-related activities. In Atlantic Canada, and in the US and Cuba further down, and also in Pakistan. You may remember that 1/3 of the country of Pakistan was underwater in this year, and they still haven't recovered fully. We know that the climate crisis is fact because we observe it in so many ways with our own eyes, ears, skin, body, and mind, noting all the climate-related changes over a very short period of time. So of course, observation, measurement, and analysis is the basic. They are the basics of science. That's what we're all about, is science here. And there's so much evidence, and here's a few more. You'll remember a few years ago, 2023, huge fires in Western Canada, but not only Western Canada, all over Canada. And in just last year, we had all kinds of really devastating weather effects. We had a huge ice storm in Ontario and Quebec, followed by May wildfires in Manitoba and Saskatchewan, storms across the prairies in August, flooding in southern British Columbia and parts of Alberta, all over. And these are just a few of the examples of the weird climate that is now upon us. And insured damages caused by severe weather last year topped $2.4 billion. And it's projected that now that number is just going to keep on increasing every year, of course. And it'll be $37 billion a year. And that's the same statistic by 2050. So lots and lots of losses. So it's not just the societal loss, but it's all kinds of economic losses as well. And this is in part what's propelling a lot of people to be serious about what's going on, is because it's affecting people's pocketbook. So climate change is having an effective impact on wildfires across the world and across Canada. In the last year, the US, Mexico, Brazil, Turkey, Greece, Europe, and the wildfire season in 2003 was unlike no other in Canadian history. Take a look at this. Until 2003, wildfires, they had been increasing, and then all of a sudden in 2003, it just went off the charts. That's around 17 million hectares of land. That's about the size of New Brunswick burnt in 1 year of our forest, of our natural heritage in this country. Here's just a map showing in June of 2023, all the fires across Canada. We were literally on fire that year. Now, the next year, 2024, it calmed down a fair amount. And then this last year, it has also calmed down, but it's increased. And you can see here now for 2025, so much more than any of the previous years that had been recorded. But 2023 remaining this unbelievable anomaly. So why is it now a climate crisis? I think you're kind of getting the idea. But it's basically because we pump 100 million tons of carbon dioxide and huge quantities of other greenhouse gases into the atmosphere, our thin skin, every single day. Can you imagine? The global community, 100 billion tons. Now, I'm going to show you soon as to why that is overwhelming the Earth's sustainability abilities. The results of all this pollution are becoming clear. More and more health problems are resulting. More and more patients are showing up in general practitioners' clinics and emergency rooms every single day. symptoms of diseases that are directly related to carbon and other pollution that we're dumping into the atmosphere. I think many of you know very well from direct experience these health problems, which are many, including heat stroke, freezing, vector-borne diseases, waterborne diseases, non-communicable diseases, including mental health, and I'm going to show a couple slides about that, trauma from wind and floods. Of course, huge trauma. And just today, somebody sent me, right at this very moment, there are unbelievably large fires in Patagonia, in the very far south of South America. And the whole article was about the toll that the fires are taking on the firefighters themselves. They're getting sick, they're dying, and so it's coming at us all which ways. Every day, heat records are being set somewhere in the world, and sometimes cold records too, like we just had in Ontario 2 weeks ago. I woke up one morning a couple of weeks ago, it was minus 35. And I don't ever recall minus 35 ever in Ontario before. And maybe once when I was a kid in Saskatchewan, I'm not sure. We didn't measure it in Celsius in those days. Every day, people around the world are experiencing a negative impact, every single day. The results are very damaging and serious. Now, these are just a few shots, screenshots off of X yesterday. It's called, the site is called Extreme Temperatures Around the World. And I encourage you to take a look at it. The guy who runs it is extremely prolific. He posts about 15 times a day about various places in the world that are experiencing a climate-related crisis. And it's happening in North America, it's happening in Africa, it's happening in Asia. Look at Asia. And the dark red is excessive heat, and the dark blue is excessive cold. And so climate change doesn't just mean climate heating, it also means extremes of cold too. But the heat has far more damage than the cold. This last year was the third warmest year on record. Again, only third to 2023 and 2024. So, you know, we think, oh, well, it didn't set a record last year. We don't have to worry. Well, wrong. We have to worry even more because it's competing with the last 2 years only. And so it's just, and there's no mention of planet warming fossil fuels in the COP30 agreement. Now, the COP30 was the big conference that just took place in Brazil in November. And the final outcome, the final communique, didn't even mention fossil fuels, which is the biggest contributor to all that carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gases. I'm going to show that too. And the abject failure of the global plastics treaty negotiations without even a mention of when they're going to have the next meeting. And I don't know if you're following all the microplastics and this and that. This is a serious business. And the amount of plastics that are being produced, and of course plastics come from fossil fuels, and it's one of the arguments used by the fossil fuel companies to keep producing more and more oil is because they keep saying we need more and more plastic. Well, I don't know if we need more and more plastic. It's polluting our world to a huge degree. And the world's top court, the International Court for Justice, laid out in historic protections for climate-impacted nations, requiring the rich nations, those that cause most of all the pollution, to help the poorer nations who are suffering mostly in many ways from the climate change, to help them pay for adaptation, to help them pay to get over and to deal with what they're doing. But of course, we all know, especially in this day and era, that the International Court of Justice has sort of lost some kind of credibility. Several of the judges are all under sanctions by the United States and all the rest of it. So they can do that type of ruling and make a law, but will people follow it? And scientists confirm that the largest coral bleaching event on record right now, as I talk, is affecting 84% of the world's coral reefs. Now that's unbelievable. Now, coral bleaching isn't the death of the reefs, although a great number, close to maybe half, are dying. But bleaching just means that if the waters cool down, then the corals might come back. And I encourage you, I'm going to talk a little bit about coral later, but that's really serious because about 500 million people rely on coral reefs for their food and for tourism and other economic maintenance. Climate change supercharged deadly Asian storms that killed more than 1,800 just recently. But then our country to the south of us, the leader of it, signs an executive order to try to bring back coal, the largest producer of greenhouse gases. So, and fossil fuel companies, and it's just been revealed, and I got the reference a little later, that 32 of these companies are responsible for 60%, or no, about over half, close to 60% of all the carbon dioxide pollution in the world. Just 32 companies. And yet, the President of the United States is encouraging them. He's getting them to, go into Venezuela, whatever. It's just unbelievable. And that's, again, why we're in a real crisis mode. We were in a crisis mode before the elections in 2024, and now we're in real crisis mode. So there it is. Over 50% of the global fossil fuel carbon emissions in 2024 came from 32 companies. The bad problem is that many of those companies are expanding their output and directly blocking climate action. They're greenwashing, they're green hushing, they've got all the smartest people in New York on Madison Avenue or wherever all the public relations firms are, giving them new advertisements, new ways of getting around what they're doing and trying to make us think that what they're doing is good. And it's just not working, though, because we can see what's happening. And a new report mentioned that 45 climate goals, and I encourage you with this reference to see the chart because it's a beautiful compilation. I couldn't give it to you here, it's just too complicated. But of the 45 climate goals mentioned in this report, 0 are on track. So where does that leave us? It's a failing report card for the Earth. In addition, and it's directly related to the climate crisis, is the loss of biodiversity. So in my thinking, we have two big crises. We have the climate crisis and the biodiversity loss crisis, but they're intimately linked. And this is a new report just 2 weeks ago from the Department for Environment, Food and Rural Affairs in His Majesty's government in the United Kingdom. And they go through all sorts of stuff, and they say, we have high confidence in our assessment of global ecosystem degradation trends and in their biological and physical impacts. We have high confidence that every critical ecosystem in the world is degrading. So not only are we degrading that thin skin, we're degrading the substance itself, our body, our earth. Nature, I quote this because I think it's a great quote. Nature is a foundation of national security. So this whole report is focused on why the biodiversity loss is a national security issue. Something we hear about from the United States often, but it's related to, say, the expansion of a ballroom or something, or taking over the Kennedy Center for the Arts as a national security issue. The climate crisis and biodiversity loss is putting at risk the ecosystem services on which human societies depend, including water, food, clean air, and critical resources. These impacts will range from crop failures, intensified natural disasters, and infectious disease outbreaks to conflict with and between states, political instability, and erosion of global economic prosperity. Increasingly scarce natural resources will become the focus of greater competition between state and non-state actors, exacerbating existing conflicts, starting new ones, and threatening global security and prosperity. Well, we can see that happening, e.g. Greenland. Next, maybe us. So how is the climate crisis? How does it happen? Now, this, I think, is the most widely misunderstood thing because it's just so simple. I'm going to show you how it happens, but I just first want to say that what we're doing to our thin skin, to our atmosphere, is part of a program of environmental degradation and destruction that has been going on for many, many years. We've been treating the earth like a commodity. We just want to take things out of it and not put anything back. We want to take things out of it, and we don't even want to fix the mess that we create by taking all these things out of it. So the pollution of the air, waters, and soil, the deforestation. Here in Canada, we have either the first or second largest forest cover in the world. And in my opinion, we are not protecting it. We are clear-cutting it and just planting it again with monocrops and things like that. We're destroying complete ecosystems that have taken millions and millions of years to develop. And then we think we can fix it up by planting a few trees and just restoring it, which takes also time. But ocean acidification and warming. We're going to talk a little bit about that too, because the ocean acidification is directly related to the carbon dioxide being spewed into the air because the ocean, one ocean, the whole Earth, the ocean absorbs 80% of atmospheric carbon dioxide. But it's now starting to get to a place where it's not going to be able to absorb so much anymore. But not only that, acidification is the outcome of so much CO2 in the ocean. And of course, acidification has all its own implications on the life of the creatures in the ocean. And the ocean warming. As this atmosphere warms, the ocean warms because it absorbs the heat from the air. It also absorbs heat from the sun. And this heat is going wild right now. The ocean is warming at rates faster than ever predicted, and almost faster and to the degree never previously ever imagined. And that's having huge consequences, not only on the corals, which depend on a certain margin of our confidence interval, whatever, of weather, but it's also, when you heat anything, what happens to it? It expands. So the ocean is expanding just from the heating alone, let alone all the ice melt that is being caused by the atmospheric warming, which is huge. Just today, I read it early this morning, couldn't sleep thinking about my presentation today, about how the Antarctic is now melting at rates never possibly imagined 3 or 4 years ago even. And now it's happening. And we know it's happening because we're measuring it. All the waste, all the garbage we dump everywhere. We're just terrible human beings, we are. Global climate change and global climate heating is the climate crisis. Biodiversity loss, the biodiversity crisis. And then you add another 225,000 people to the Earth's population every single day. 225,000 new people on our globe, on that little thing just out there circulating around the sun, one of the millions and trillions of suns around the world, every single day. And everybody needs enough to live by. They want to get by. And a fair number of these people want more than the average. And threatening the Earth like treating the Earth like a commodity to be exploded and trashed. So here it is. The sun is the source of our life. It's the source of all our energy. And we receive from the sun short-wave radiation in the form of light. Because, you know, if you have a prism and you break the light down, right, you get the 7 colors. We also have ultraviolet light. So this ultraviolet light and the short-wave radiation, like the visible light, passes through our atmosphere with very little effect because carbon dioxide is not affected by short-wave radiation. Now, this short-wave radiation, some of it's reflected back off into space, but most of it is absorbed and taken in by the surface of the Earth. And when this happens, and it's been known by physicists and by scientists for over 125 years now, that when this light hits Earth, it is sent out back into the atmosphere as long-wave radiation, mainly infrared, which we don't see, but it's there. We can take pictures of it. If you take a picture, we ourselves are giving off infrared radiation. We were just at a museum in Valencia, one of the most incredible I've ever seen, a science museum. And we had our bodies' images taken a picture of the radiation that we ourselves are giving off. So our Earth gives back to the atmosphere and out to eventually long-wave radiation, which affects carbon dioxide. Now, this process has been going on for hundreds of millions, billions of years. And in a certain balance of carbon dioxide in the air, this passing through and absorption and the creation of heat, when the long-wave radiation hits the carbon dioxide molecule, heat is given off. It has kept us warm. It's kept our planet unique in the entire universe, as far as we know, in enabling life to exist. As we add more and more carbon dioxide, just think, 100 million tons a day, there's more carbon dioxide and more heat being produced. That's what we call climate change, climate heating. It's unbelievably simple. And I know that, that there are climate scientists and you can get into all sorts of finicky details of transmission and absorption and things. But this is basically it. It's just unbelievably simple physics. And this is how it is happening to our world. So how much CO2 is emitted each year? In 1950, the world emitted 6 billion tons. In 1990, 40 years later, it was 20 billion. Now, 2026, it's over 37 billion tons a year. And that, if you divide 37 billion by 365, you get over 100 million tons a day. Just CO2. Now, this is so interesting. I'll do the right-hand side first. But what's in the air? What's in that skin that surrounds our globe? Almost 80% of the atmosphere is nitrogen. 20% is oxygen. About 1% is argon. And then 0.04% are all the greenhouse gases and a few other things, ozone and a few other gases. 0.04% of our atmosphere. So when we're dumping 100 million tons into this tiny amount, really, compared to the nitrogen and oxygen that sustains our life as well, it is having a huge effect. And not only is it carbon dioxide, it's methane and nitrous oxide, I'm just getting a little confused here, nitrous oxide, NO2. These are the main ones. And you can see here, carbon dioxide from fossil fuel and industrial processes, 65% of all greenhouse gases. Methane, 60%. Nitrous oxide, 6%. And then carbon dioxide from land sources, because we all know that the land also gives off carbon dioxide at certain times, especially when we disturb marshes and things like that. The carbon that is stored all over the world, particularly in our northern regions, and including in Russia, which also has one of the 2 largest forest covers in the world, it exudes also carbon dioxide. And we know too the story about cows. They're belching. Contributes, I'm not sure exactly what it is. It was like almost 1% or so of greenhouse gases just from cattle. And I've just been reading about cattle's history. It's interesting. So around 1850, the start of the Industrial Revolution, carbon dioxide was 280 parts per million, about 0.03% of the atmosphere. Now, today, it's about 430 parts per million. That's a 50% increase in 70 years, or whatever it is. 70 years, 75 years. So it comprises now 0.043%. And if you look at it, that is a what percent increase? That's like 35, 40% increase in the carbon dioxide in the air. And that is, all of this is despite the ocean doing its best to absorb as much carbon dioxide as it possibly can, endangering itself at the same time, getting out of its normal balance. CO2 operates in a fine balance with normal fluctuation when it goes higher, Earth warms, and when it's lower, Earth cools. It's been known for a long time, as is the physics of how heating happens, for over 125 years. And any large changes can and will cause problems. And these problems are now showing up daily in our newscasts, or they should be. They aren't always. Earth also has mechanisms to keep it controlled, especially the ocean, and also the forests and vegetation. We know that photosynthesis takes place by the absorption of carbon dioxide by the leaves, and this helps too. But it's, and then some people say, well, we need more carbon dioxide so we can have more green on Earth. Yeah, it doesn't work like that because we're burning the green faster than we could ever produce it. So here's just from the last 40 years of life on Earth in terms of carbon dioxide concentration in the atmosphere, methane concentration, and nitrous oxide concentration. You can see they're all going wild. This one gives a little bit more interesting perspective. For the last 800,000 years, carbon dioxide fluctuating over the hundreds of thousands of years, and now all of a sudden, here, this was 1950, and this now, where this green arrow is where we're at now at 430. So, and in this epoch, in this time, it's just going straight up in these types of curves. It's not even just gradually going up. It's just going off the chart. This is for the last 1,000 years, the last 1,025 years. And we can see all of a sudden, 1850, the start of the Industrial Revolution. I mean, you kind of wonder, what more proof do we need to get people on board? And CO2 emissions from fossil fuels, this is a wonderful source of information and data about all kinds of health and societal things. Our World in Data, go to it anytime you want to get some good graphs. So this is carbon dioxide from land use, this is from fossil fuels, and this is the total of the world. This is this little bit here added onto fossil fuels, giving the total. But you can see that fossil fuels are the cause. They are definitely the root cause of it. And here's where the fossil fuels come from industry, electricity generation, agriculture, transport, and buildings. And here now we can see is not only what is it, but where is it coming from? Where is all this carbon dioxide coming from? Which countries? So we can see China's the main culprit at the moment, but you can see it just started not long ago. Even when I was here 15 years ago, and when I was teaching earlier at U of T, I would tell my students that our carbon footprint as a Canadian was 1/32 that of a Chinese. We have so much more impact on the earth than China, but China's catching up now. They're, unbelievable progress. Here's North America, here's the United States. This dark blue is the rest of North America, including Canada. But let us not be so smug because, here again is showing how China is way above the United States, but still the United States, second largest producer of global greenhouse gases, followed by India, Germany, Brazil, United Kingdom, France, but they're way down there. The Europeans are really doing their bit. We're not. And here, again, you can see, I'll just skip that one. So the greenhouse gas emissions are from these countries generally. And you can see that, here's this Mercator map again, not showing the proportions very well, but it shows who the big polluters are. But you can see that most of the poor countries of the world are not there in producing carbon dioxide. And lest we think that we're so great here in Canada because our actual volume of greenhouse gas isn't as great or nearly as great as the United States, China, India, etc., we have right up there with the United States per capita CO2 emissions right up there. We're the second largest producer of CO2 per capita in the world. So we have a big job to do here. Now we can say, wow, look at how warm and cold it is outside. We need to heat our homes. Well, a lot of other people heat their homes too, in Norway and Sweden and Russia and elsewhere. So I'll just skip that one. So where is the climate crisis? It's everywhere because there is what's called atmospheric homogenization. The gases that are emitted into the atmosphere from, say, all the factories in Canada or the United States or China, it gets spread around. There's all those big winds up there, circulating around and spreading all the gases more or less equally around with some variation. So from north to south, east to west, but it is harsher in the tropical areas. So it affects all people, all life, and it affects the ocean, air, and land. And so when is the climate crisis? Well, it was yesterday, it's today, and it's tomorrow. There's no question. We are in it full blast. And who's affected by the climate crisis? Well, everyone. But the poor and vulnerable are always and everywhere suffer the most from any kind of conflict or disaster, and they are suffering also the most as well, and including what we call small island states, like Tuvalu. I don't know if you've seen a movie. There's a movie about Tuvalu about how the population has to move because the rising seas have polluted its inland sources of water. During storms, the waves crash over the island and pollute its lakes. It only has a few little lakes that they get their fresh water from. And now Australia has a special deal with Tuvalu, allowing, I think it's like 150 climate refugees a year with full citizenship in Australia, starting last year. And dry areas in deserts. I was just recently in Spain. They've been undergoing drought for years and years and years now. And it's terrible. And you here in Alberta, for sure, you had a prolonged drought for 3 years? I think it's still ongoing in the southwest corner of the province. And today, all of Canada, and even look at our north, which is the most rapidly heating area of the world. The temperatures in Iqaluit and in the other places where the Inuit people live, it's They're getting like 20 degrees Celsius, positive 20, sometimes in the middle of winter. Last year, they had 20-degree temperatures in, I can't remember, it was March or something. Just unheard of. Absolutely unheard of. Just like I think it must be unheard of to have February 5th, 9 degrees here in Edmonton. Certainly not when I lived here. And millions, so not only is everyone, but it also affects us as professionals, but it also farmers are affected. Their crops, their growing seasons, everything, the soils, you name it. Sailors, people who sail around the seas, scientists are all involved, journalists, healthcare professionals, teachers, politicians, students, all professionals. We're all being impacted. And so what are the major effects and impacts? So I'm going to go over this fairly quickly because I want to get to the end part. The global average temperatures have risen. The whole trying to keep the world to 1.5 degrees C, it's gone. You'll hear, you know, because I'm not a climate scientist, so I can say that. So a climate scientist will say, because these are measured over a 10-year rolling period of average temperatures. So we're at 1.4 now, if you include all the 10 last years. But if you look at the last year, the year before, we've exceeded 1.5 already, and it is not going to be any different this year, or next year, or the next year. So we've shot past that. Now we're just hoping for keeping it under 2 degrees, in which the impacts are going to be even huger than what we have now. So the ocean warms, expands, the atmospheric changes, air circulation problems. Also, not air circulation, but the currents circulations in the ocean are being altered. Much of Northern Europe, you know, if you look at London, England, it's like on par, I'm not exactly sure, like with Yellowknife or something in terms of the Canadian geography. But it doesn't have the same climate as Yellowknife does. It has the same climate as, I don't know, not even Toronto is far worse. But anyway, it's all that part of Europe is kept warm by a circulating, I can't think of the name, current coming up from the Caribbean, crossing the Atlantic Ocean and keeping that part of the world. But there's all this cold ice, melted ice now, water, coming down from Greenland and from other northern areas, and it's interrupting these currents. And so who knows? We don't even know what's going to happen, but we know that it's not going to be good. And acidification, startling Arctic and now Antarctic sea ice melt and decline. And all glaciers everywhere in the world are in retreat. And you know here too, because I was born on the North Saskatchewan River, and the glaciers that feed the North Saskatchewan River and everything are just not far from here. And those glaciers are depleting. And and it's happening now. A lot of scientists are saying we're almost getting beyond a tipping point, because all the projections of even 5 years ago or more never predicted this type of glacier melt that is taking place. And, you know, we sometimes think that we have all this science and we're so smart, we know so much. Well, we really don't. We do know a lot, you know. It's just like in medicine, there's always so much more to know. Same with the climate crisis, there's so much more to know. And we're just kind of scratching the surface with all our science. And now we have, again, back to one of the why it's a climate crisis, is because the world's greatest funder and many of the world's greatest scientists are from the United States, and their funding has been trashed. The National Oceanic and Atmospheric Association has lost all of its climate change research. The Environmental Protection Agency is far from protecting the environment anymore. They've had all of theirs cut, and now they're captured by people who don't understand. And increasing frequency and intensity of weather events. Hurricanes, you know, they say it's not really increasing the frequency of the hurricanes, but it's increasing the intensity. So every year now we have more and more level 5 hurricanes striking. So extreme weather events lead to injury, morbidity, and mortality. Heat, cold, rain, floods, and drought. These are the extremes. This is one of the major impacts. And shifting the seasons. The seasons are shifting. Farmers know that their planting season is earlier now. But do they want to plant earlier? And now I'm just worried for the farmers next year because there's no snow on the ground here at the moment. And anyway, hunger, famine, and malnutrition from changing agriculture. All kinds of predictions about how the climate change will reduce the amount of wheat production, the amount of barley production, the amount of millet, et cetera, and corn, et cetera. And in most countries in the world, it will decline. In Canada, we may actually increase our agricultural output because of the increased growing season and maybe even the opportunity to plant more crops in the seasons as they increase. And we have so much land. But if we don't get the weather, we don't get the water, we don't get the rain and the snow or whatever, then all of that is all up in the air too. And the decrease in fresh and safe water supplies, first from the rising ocean, like I mentioned, but also the pollution and overuse of water and drought and poverty. So safe water supplies, and you will continue hearing about that because I can't remember now, billions of people now are in a water crisis in the world. And it's not going to get better. There's an increase of disease, both infectious and non-communicable, including mental and surgical disease. Decrease in biodiversity and widespread damage, and huge economic impacts. 145 billion in insured losses in 2025, and it's projected to be 38 trillion per year by 2050, just from climate crises. 38 trillion. They say that economic impact will be a reduction by about 20% by 2050 of our global output. And the United Nations has even labeled climate change as the single biggest health threat facing humanity. Of course, I've already mentioned this. And every year, environmental factors take the lives of around 13 million people. And that's just the number of people dying. What about the number of people getting sick and injured and hurt, the morbidity? It's huge. I mentioned coral bleaching. I just want to say it. Yeah, 500,000 people directly depend on the corals, and now 84% of them globally are bleached. And I encourage you, I wish I had more time, I'd explain to you how it happens. It's so interesting. You can read it here on this slide later. So the rate of extinction now, again, ecosystem degradation, extinction of species is 10 to hundreds of times higher than the average over the past 10 million years. It suggests that we're in now an area of the 6th mass extinction. It may be underway. And food production is the most significant cause of terrestrial biodiversity loss. We are abusing the earth to produce so much food for so many people as fast and as quickly as we can, using all the chemical knowledge that we've developed over the last 100 years. And we're really not doing it smartly. And as the global population grows, reaching 9.7 billion by 2050. 2050 is only 25 years from now. That's not very long. And that means another 1.5 billion people on Earth in next 25 years. That and the impact on food production and natural systems will intensify. So the causal pathways, and I'm not going to go into these, but there are causal pathways from the intense heat waves and fires. They are the cause, but the pathway, but it leads to all sorts of things, including vector-borne diseases, geographical shifts in food production, lost work capacity in vulnerable people who have to work outside. People are literally falling dead on the job in Texas. Heat-related mortality expected to double in cities by 2050 and triple by 2080. And urbanization is a factor as a result of the climate change, because we heard this morning about displaced persons. Those were internally displaced persons. But there's going to be so many more people displaced from where they live. And where are they going to go? You know, it's just, and heat stress events have affected most areas of Canada to varying degrees. This is an interesting study looking at relative mortality in 3 Quebec cities with temperature. And we can see that as the very extreme minus temperatures, the relative morbidity goes up, then it kind of levels out. And then as you get into the 20s and 30 degrees Celsius, relative mortality goes up tremendously. And that's a big problem for especially elderly people and children. Other ways, the causal pathways of floods, you can read on this, increased mortality up to 50% post-floods, decreased water supplies, food, desertification. And it's not just us who are affected, it's all living creatures, everything. And that's it, southern Alberta, right? Many of the farmers have had to sell their cattle because they can't raise them anymore. It's just too hot and dry. So mental health, and I'm so glad that other people have been talking about it today, but the impacts from drought, heat, and disasters is huge on mental health. First of all, there's isolation and loneliness. There's suicide. Farmers in India are committing suicide at huge rates. Post-traumatic stress disorder. Study after study from the United States after hurricanes shows the huge increase in PTSD in these affected populations, but also in the first responders, the fires and the deaths, the loss of livelihood and unemployment, and war and conflict. And there are many good papers written about how the climate crisis was the cause of the Syrian civil war, because all the farmers had several years in a row of drought, and they started to protest in the capital city in Damascus. And what did the leader do? He went in and mowed them all down and started the civil war. Increase in violence, increases in rates of domestic violence and child abuse after hurricanes and wildfires. And there's a huge amount of depression in youth, fearing the future and hopelessness. Again, this burnout kind of idea. And children all witnessing death and disaster, loss of parents, displacement from homes and country, forced migration, and urbanization. People are moving into the cities because they can't grow food anymore in a lot of places. And so they're coming into the cities in huge numbers. The world is urbanizing at a huge rate. And that exacerbates crowding, poor sanitation, and increases in poverty. Sleep disruption, people who don't have air conditioning at night when it's 30 degrees at night. Hard to sleep in the elderly and children. And an increase in autism also, and especially with respect to social media and spending more time indoors. So mental health, here's a paper about, here's what researchers should be, research should say should be done to help evacuees. So that's the mitigation, the farmers killing themselves. Those references are there, and what to do. So there's two main things that we can do. They're grouped into two areas, mitigation and adaptation. Mitigation is eliminating or reducing the cause, getting rid of the fossil fuels, generally. Sorry to say it here in northern Alberta, but we have to reduce our use of fossil fuels. That is the bottom line. There is no other line. And adaptation, and these are the responses to the impacts and the effects of the climate crisis. Even now in Florida, South Florida, and around the Miami area, they're spending hundreds of millions of dollars a year to raise their roads, because their roads are being flooded once a week in some areas in Miami and stuff. So they're actually raising the roads by 2 or 3 meters, and it's costing a lot of money. That's just one idea. So there's no central role for health. There is a central role, sorry, for health professionals, all health professionals, including the primary care specialists, public health system, nursing, et cetera, dealing with the climate crisis, and researchers, educators, and communicators. There's a role for every single person in this room, for every single department in this Faculty of Medicine and Dentistry. Patient care, hospitals, education, health system, organization, personal advocacy, provide direction, leadership, and inspiration. You may not be doing too much here, but a lot of places are treating many health-related diseases, trauma and problems, heat stroke, dehydration, heart problems, arthritis, kidney issues, skin, liver, mental health, many infectious diseases, emergency room preparation. It goes on and on. Disaster management, prevention, advise patients, and after floods, what to do, all these things. And so the education has to be appropriate now in our medical schools and in faculties like this. You as students and you as faculty have to be learning and sharing the knowledge about what's going on, so that the young and the up and coming health professionals will be able to deal with what's coming, and it's coming fast. And in this study here, physicians have expressed alarm at their lack of preparation to care for and counsel patients experiencing the impacts of global climate change and other environmental impacts, which also disproportionately affect socially vulnerable populations. And this paper here, just from last year, Europe's medical students are now, by an order of the European Union, being given training for climate-related health problems. We need to stay true to advancing equity-centered evidence systems as we learn and lead amongst the complexity, change, and uncertainty of our evidence ecosystem. We, as scientists, believe in evidence and in evidence-based decision-making. And we have to stay true to that. We can't just say, oh, well, we know what's going on, but I don't want to move too far out of my comfort zone if our leaders aren't doing anything. But it's up to us. Personal, organizational advocacy, provide direction and leadership. You yourselves here are amongst the most educated citizens in our society. You must be doing something. Here's some key organizations to be aware of in Canada. There's more, but these are some of the best ones, and especially the Canadian Association for Physicians for the Environment, but the Canadian Public Health Association, Canadian Medical Association, the Royal College, on, lots. And my second last slide, I think, sorry. After doing the Planetary Health Weekly, 52 weeks a year, some years, for 10 years, I had just had to kind of give up a little bit of effort. So I've converted it to a monthly, and please sign up. You've got the card there. The website hasn't been changed yet. I'm still trying to figure out how to do that. It comes out actually it doesn't come out every Thursday now. It comes out on the first day of every month. And I also mentioned this. It's a book, I have a book chapter in about all the legal and regulatory frameworks of the world in terms of the climate change. It's chapter 16 in this book by a very amazing UK academic, Mike Sachs. And then another very, very close friend, Edward Milner, he's got the next chapter in the book on biodiversity. And so thank you so much. And it's truly a great pleasure to be back here with you. And I feel so very welcome here. I feel so warm and fuzzy on the inside. And if you're ever interested, just contact me. I'm always looking for volunteers. The whole Planetary Health Monthly is a volunteer effort. It's free, and I hope you'll sign up. Also, I'll just mention this. There's so much, as maybe I should say, garbage being said about immigrants and migration and all this kind of stuff. It just really kind of irks me tremendously, coming from Saskatchewan. My parents were both born in Saskatchewan, but all my grandparents, they weren't born in Saskatchewan. We're all immigrants, right? And this is a great new little book by an Oxford academic, Ian Golden, called The Shortest History of Migration. It starts like 2 million years ago. And it turns out that humanity has been on the move ever since whenever, right? Ever since we started walking on two legs, we've been moving around the world. And Debbie, my wife and I, we just had the experience of touring many of the world's great museums in Europe. And the explanations and the history that's given in those museums about the migration of peoples, it's just so deeply embedded in humanity to be moving, whether we're forced to move, whether we want to move, or whether somebody, we're coerced to move. And of course, we all know that many people have been coerced to move in many different eras. 12 million Africans extracted out of the continent over a few hundred years, many of them, and almost all brought to the Americas. So anyway, we are a group on the move, and the thing is we got to move in the right direction. We can't be backsliding, and I hate to say it, but much of it is all on you young people. I'm 72 now. I hope I have another decade or two, maybe, if I'm lucky, but whatever. But it's going to fall on you, and I'm sorry to say, it's my generation, and that's really greatly responsible for it, because we rested on all the fruits of the fossil fuel economy. It was like amazing. We had everything. It just provided so much wealth to us, so many nice things, our cars, our airplanes, and all the rest of it, and natural gas and heating in our homes and things like that. It allowed our civilization to greatly advance. But it's the very positive thing is that there are alternatives, and they are great alternatives. And one only has to look at the expansion just in the last few years of solar and wind power. Unbelievable. Solar and wind power now, generation of electricity, is outdoing fossil fuel generation now for the first time ever, and it's going to continue, but it needs to continue at a huge rate, or else it's just going to get worse and worse. But thank you very much.